If your tomato plants look fine in their pots, but then sulk the moment you plant them out, stop growing, droop in the sun, or just sit there looking miserable, the problem often starts in the first week, not before planting, not because you forgot some magic feed, but because once they are in the ground or the greenhouse border, we start fussing over them far too much. Hello, my friends. Today I want to keep this simple and practical. Let's talk about what to do with tomato plants in the first week after planting them out, so they settle in properly instead of standing still, wilting, or looking half dead. The main thing to remember is this. In the first week, tomatoes do not need constant feeding. They need steady conditions, air, sensible watering, and time. If you added compost, well-rotted manure, or a little slow-release feed to the planting hole, that is enough for now. The plant has what it needs to get started. Your job in the first few days is not to push it harder. Your job is to let the roots make contact with the soil and settle down. So keep this in your head from the beginning. Do not try to force growth too early. First, let the plant take. Now let's go through the first week. On the day you plant your tomatoes out, whether that is in a greenhouse border, a polytunnel, a raised bed, a grow bag, or a large pot, plant them properly and water them in well. That first watering is important. It settles the compost or soil around the roots and removes air gaps. Once that is done, leave the plant alone. You do not need to come back a few hours later with more water. You do not need to give it a little extra feed in the evening just in case. You do not need to start testing 5 different things. Plant it, water it in, then give it peace. On the first and second day, this is where many gardeners start to worry too soon. The plant may not look full of life straight away. The leaves may look softer than you would like. If the sun comes out strongly, especially in a greenhouse, it may droop for part of the day. That does not automatically mean something is wrong. A tomato plant that has just been moved is not expected to shoot upwards overnight. It is dealing with a change of root space, temperature, light, wind, and moisture. In Britain, that can mean a warm, sunny afternoon followed by a chilly night, and young plants feel that. So in those first couple of days, do not judge success by fast growth. Look at the general condition. Is the growing tip still alive? Is the stem holding up? Does the plant recover when the worst of the heat has passed? Is it looking slightly tired, or is it genuinely collapsing? That difference matters. The first big mistake is overwatering. People plant tomatoes out on Monday, then water again on Tuesday, then again on Wednesday. Not because the soil is dry, but because they are nervous. Please do not do that. Check the soil or compost properly. Do not just look at the dry surface. Put your finger in a little deeper. If it is still damp below the top layer, leave it. In the first few days after planting, tomatoes often suffer more from kindness than from thirst. Cold, wet soil around young roots is a very common reason for plants sitting still, especially in our British spring and early summer weather. Now let's look at day 3 and day 4. By this point, watch the plant a little more carefully. If it is alive, the color is reasonable, the growing tip is not hanging down, and the leaves are not getting worse each day, then things are probably going in the right direction. It may not be growing much above ground yet, and that is fine. A good sign at this stage is not dramatic growth. A good sign is that the plant is not declining. It looks a bit steadier. It begins to hold itself better. It is quietly adjusting. But if by the 3rd or 4th day the plant looks worse, then start looking for the cause. Most of the time, it is one of 3 things. Too much water, too much heat with not enough ventilation, or soil that is too cold, especially if the plant was put out before the nights had properly warmed up. That is when you investigate. but do not panic before the plant has had a fair chance to recover from being moved. Now, a word about greenhouses and polytunnels. In Britain, we often think, it is not that hot outside, so the greenhouse will be fine. But on a sunny day, a greenhouse can heat up very quickly, even when the outside air still feels cool. If you plant tomatoes and then shut everything tight, you can easily give them a hot, stuffy, airless environment. Tomatoes do not thank you for that. After planting, they need warmth, yes, but they also need airflow. Open vents. Open the door when the weather allows. Keep the air moving. Very often, a tomato plant is not standing still because it needs more feed. It is standing still because it has been cooked in a greenhouse with no fresh air. If your tomatoes are outside, on an allotment, in a raised bed, or in pots near a wall, think about wind and sudden sun. A plant that looked perfectly strong in a pot can struggle when it is suddenly put into open ground, with a dry breeze on one side and a bright spell of sun on the other. If the plant is having a hard time, do not try to prove a point. A little temporary protection is sensible. You can use horticultural fleece, a bit of shade during the hottest part of the day, or a simple windbreak for a day or two. The aim is not to wrap the plant up forever. The aim is to help it settle without being battered. You want a healthy tomato plant, not a heroic story about how it survived a rough week. Now let's move to day 5, day 6, and day 7. By the end of the first week, you can usually see whether the plant has accepted its new home. If it is settling well, it will look more confident. The leaves will look a bit livelier. The growing tip will not look frozen or lifeless. The whole plant will seem less shocked. And this is where you must resist the next mistake. Do not disturb the rhythm just because a week has passed. Do not automatically reach for tomato feed. Do not decide that now is the time for a strong liquid feed because you want quick results. Look at the plant first. If it is improving, leave it to carry on. It is doing what you want. Let me say this clearly. In the first week after planting out, feeding is usually not the answer. If you planted into decent soil, fresh compost, a prepared border, or a grow bag, the plant has enough to begin with. What matters most now is root contact, stable moisture, warmth, and air. Many gardeners make the mistake of trying to feed a plant before it has properly settled. The roots are still adjusting, and we are already pushing from above. Do not rush it. Roots first, growth after. And do not start poking around the base of the plant too soon either. I know it is tempting to tidy the surface, loosen the soil, or fiddle with the compost, but the roots are just starting to explore. Give them a chance. There will be plenty of time for careful loosening, mulching, tying in, side shooting, and feeding later. The first week is not the time for constant service. It is the time for calm. So let's make it very simple. What is normal in the first week? It is normal if the plant does not race upwards. It is normal if it looks a little quieter than you expected, but still alive. It is normal if one lower leaf looks a bit tired, as long as the growing tip is healthy. It is normal if there is no obvious new growth for a few days, provided the plant is not getting worse. But there are warning signs. Be concerned if the plant declines every day. Be concerned if the leaves hang all the time, not just during the warmest part of the day. Be concerned if the color turns poor, the growing tip stops looking alive, or the soil is going from waterlogged to bone dry and back again. Be concerned if the greenhouse feels like a sealed-up sauna and you are expecting the tomatoes to settle beautifully in there. That is when you need to correct the conditions. So, in plain terms, the first week should look like this. On planting day, plant properly and water in well. For the first couple of days, do not panic and do not water without a reason. On day 3 and day 4, judge the overall condition, not the speed of growth. By day 5 to day 7, check whether the plant is settling, and if it is, do not interfere with unnecessary feeding and fussing. That is the whole working method. Do not love your tomato plants to death. In the first week, they usually need fewer jobs from you, not more. They need air, steady moisture, reasonable warmth, and time for the roots to get hold of their new home. Write in the comments what usually happens to your tomatoes after planting out. Do they stand still, wilt in the greenhouse, struggle in the wind, go yellow at the bottom, or settle in without much trouble? And subscribe to the channel if you find calm, practical gardening advice useful, without shouting and without nonsense.